colours would have gone on waving them before their astonished senses, it is impossible to tell, nor is it necessary to speculate on these matters, for a startling interruption occurred at that moment which took their whole attention by storm. This was a violent knocking at the door of the house, and then its sudden bursting open, which was immediately succeeded by a scuffle in the room without, and the clash of weapons. Transported with the hope that rescue had at length arrived, Emma and Dolly shrieked aloud for help. Nor were their shrieks unanswered, for after a hurried interval, a man, bearing in one hand a drawn sword and in the other a taper, rushed into the chamber where they were confined. It was some check upon their transport to find in this person an entire stranger, but they appealed to him nevertheless, and besought him in impassioned language to restore them to their friends. "For what other purpose am I here?" he answered, closing the door and standing with his back against it. "With what object have I made my way to this place, through difficulty and danger, but to preserve you?" With a joy for which it was impossible to find adequate expression, they embraced each other and thanked Heaven for this most timely aid. Their deliverer stepped forward for a moment to put the light upon the table, and immediately returning to his former position against the door, bared his head and looked on smilingly. "You have news of my uncle, sir?" said Emma, turning hastily towards him. "And of my father and mother," added Dolly. "Yes," he said, "good news." "They are alive and unhurt?" they both cried at once. "Yes, and unhurt," he rejoined. "And close at hand?" "I did not say close at hand," he answered smoothly. "They are at no great distance. Your friends, sweet one," he added, addressing Dolly, "are within a few hours' journey. You will be restored to them, I hope, to-night." "My uncle, sir?" faltered Emma. "Your uncle, dear Miss Haredale, happily, I say happily, because he has succeeded where many of our creed have failed, and is safe, has crossed the sea and is out of Britain." "I thank God for it," said Emma faintly. "You say well. You have reason to be thankful, greater reason than it is possible for you, who have seen but one night of these cruel outrages, to imagine." "Does he desire," said Emma, "that I should follow him?" "Do you ask if he desires it?" cried the stranger in surprise. "If he desires it? But you do not know the danger of remaining in England, the difficulty of escape, or the price hundreds would pay to secure the means when you make that inquiry. Pardon me, I had forgotten that you could not, being prisoner here." "I gather, sir," said Emma, after a moment's pause, "from what you hint at, but fear to tell me, that I have witnessed but the beginning, and the least of the violence to which we are exposed, and that it has not yet slackened in its fury?" He shrugged his shoulders, shook his head, lifted up his hands, and with the same smooth smile, which was not a pleasant one to see, cast his eyes upon the ground, and remained silent. "You may venture, sir, to speak plain," said Emma, "and to tell me the worst. We have undergone some preparation for it." But here Dolly interposed, and entreated her not to hear the worst, but the best, and besought the gentleman to tell them the best, and to keep the remainder of his news until they were safe among their friends again. "It is told in 3 words," he said, glancing at the locksmith's daughter with a look of some displeasure. "The people have risen, to a man, against us. The streets are filled with soldiers, who support them and do their bidding. We have no protection but from above, and no safety but in flight, and that is a poor resource, for we are watched on every hand, and detained here both by force and fraud. Miss Haredale, I cannot bear, believe me that I cannot bear, by speaking of myself, or what I have done, or am prepared to do, to seem to vaunt my services before you; but having powerful Protestant connections, and having my whole wealth embarked with theirs in shipping and commerce, I happily possess the means of saving your uncle. I have the means of saving you, and in redemption of my sacred promise made to him, I am here, pledged not to leave you until I have placed you in his arms. The treachery or penitence of one of the men about you led to the discovery of your place of confinement, and that I have forced my way here, sword in hand, you see." "You bring," said Emma, faltering, "some note or token from my uncle?" "No, he doesn't," cried Dolly, pointing at him earnestly. "No, I am sure he doesn't. Don't go with him for the world." "Hush, pretty fool, be silent," he replied, frowning angrily upon her. "No, Miss Haredale, I have no letter, nor any token of any kind; for while I sympathize with you, and such as you, on whom misfortune so heavy and so undeserved has fallen, I value my life. I carry, therefore, no writing which, found upon me, would lead to its certain loss. I never thought of bringing any other token, nor did Mr. Haredale think of entrusting me with one, possibly because he had good experience of my faith and honesty, and owed his life to me." There was a reproof conveyed in these words, which to a nature like Emma Haredale's was well addressed; but Dolly, who was differently constituted, was by no means touched by it, and still conjured her, in all the terms of affection and attachment she could think of, not to be lured away. "Time presses," said their visitor, who, although he sought to express the deepest interest, had something cold and even in his speech that grated on the ear, "and danger surrounds us. If I have exposed myself to it in vain, let it be so. But if you and he should ever meet again, do me justice. If you decide to remain, as I think you do, remember, Miss Haredale, that I left you with a solemn caution, and acquitting myself of all the consequences to which you expose yourself." "Stay, sir," cried Emma, "one moment, I beg you. Cannot we," and she drew Dolly closer to her, "cannot we go together? The task of conveying one female in safety through such scenes as we must encounter, to say nothing of attracting the attention of those who crowd the streets," he answered, "is enough. I have said that she will be restored to her friends tonight. If you accept the service I tender, Miss Haredale, she shall be instantly placed in safe conduct, and that promise redeemed. Do you decide to remain? People of all ranks and creeds are flying from the town, which is sacked from end to end. Let me be of use in some quarter. Do you stay or go?" "Dolly," said Emma in a hurried manner, "my dear girl, this is our last hope. If we part now, it is only that we may meet again in happiness and honour. I will trust to this gentleman." "No, no, no!" cried Dolly, clinging to her. "Pray, pray do not." "You hear," said Emma, "that tonight, only tonight, within a few hours, think of that, you will be among those who would die of grief to lose you, and who are now plunged in the deepest misery for your sake. Pray for me, dear girl, as I will for you, and never forget the many quiet hours we have passed together. Say one God bless you. Say that at parting." But Dolly could say nothing. No, not when Emma kissed her cheek 100 times and covered it with tears could she do more than hang upon her neck and sob and clasp and hold her tight. "We have time for no more of this," cried the man, unclenching her hands and pushing her roughly off, as he drew Emma Haredale towards the door. "Now, quick, outside there. Are you ready?" "Ay," cried a loud voice, which made him start. "Quite ready. Stand back here, for your lives." And in an instant he was felled like an ox in the butcher's shambles, struck down as though a block of marble had fallen from the roof and crushed him. And cheerful light and beaming faces came pouring in, and Emma was clasped in her uncle's embrace, and Dolly, with a shriek that pierced the air, fell into the arms of her father and mother. What fainting there was, what laughing, what crying, what sobbing, what smiling, how much questioning, no answering, all talking together, all beside themselves with joy, what kissing, congratulating, embracing, shaking of hands, and falling into all these raptures, over and over and over again, no language can describe. At length, and after a long time, the old locksmith went up and fairly hugged two strangers who had stood apart and left them to themselves. And then they saw whom? Yes, Edward Chester and Joseph Willet. "See here!" cried the locksmith. "See here! Where would any of us have been without these two? Oh, Mr. Edward! Mr. Edward! Oh, Joe! Joe, how light and yet how full you have made my old heart tonight!" "It was Mr. Edward that knocked him down, sir," said Joe. "I longed to do it, but I gave it up to him. Come, you brave and honest gentlemen, get your senses together, for you haven't long to lie here." He had his foot upon the breast of their sham deliverer, in the absence of a spare arm, and gave him a gentle roll as he spoke. Gashford, for it was no other, crouching yet malignant, raised his scowling face like sin subdued, and pleaded to be gently used. "I have access to all my lord's papers, Mr. Haredale," he said, in a submissive voice. Mr. Haredale keeping his back towards him and not once looking round. "There are very important documents among them. There are a great many in secret drawers and distributed in various places, known only to my lord and me. I can give some very valuable information and render important assistance to any inquiry. You will have to answer it if I receive ill usage." "Pah!" cried Joe in deep disgust. "Get up, man, you're waited for outside. Get up, do you hear?" Gashford slowly rose, and picking up his hat, and looking with a baffled malevolence, yet with an air of despicable humility all round the room, crawled out. "And now, gentlemen," said Joe, who seemed to be the spokesman of the party, for all the rest were silent, "the sooner we get back to the Black Lion, the better, perhaps." Mr. Haredale nodded assent, and drawing his niece's arm through his, and taking one of her hands between his own, passed out straightway, followed by the locksmith, Mrs Varden, and